Chapter 4, Part 12. Further, domination is itself objectively divisive. It maintains the oppressed I in a position of adhesion to a reality which seems all-powerful and overwhelming, and then alienates by presenting mysterious forces to explain this power. Part of the oppressed I is located in the reality to which it adheres. Part is located outside the self in the mysterious forces which are regarded as responsible for a reality about which nothing can be done. The individual is divided between an identical past and present, and a future without hope. He or she is a person who does not perceive himself or herself as becoming, hence cannot have a future to be built in unity with others. But as he or she breaks this adhesion, and objectifies the reality from which he or she starts to emerge, the person begins to integrate as a subject, an I, confronting an object, reality. At this moment, sundering the false unity of the divided self, one becomes a true individual. To divide the oppressed, an ideology of oppression is indispensable. In contrast, achieving their unity requires a form of cultural action through which they come to know the why and how of their adhesion to reality. It requires de-ideologizing. Hence, the effort to unify the oppressed does not call for mere ideological sloganizing. The latter, by distorting the authentic relation between the subject and objective reality, also separates the cognitive, the affective, and the active aspects of the total, indivisible personality. The object of dialogical libertarian action is not to dislodge the oppressed from a mythological reality in order to bind them to another reality. On the contrary, the object of dialogical action is to make it possible for the oppressed, by perceiving their adhesion, to opt to transform an unjust reality. Since the unity of the oppressed involves solidarity among them, regardless of their exact status, thus unity unquestionably requires class consciousness. However, the submersion in reality, which characterizes the peasants of Latin America, means that consciousness of being an oppressed class must be preceded, or at least accompanied, by achieving consciousness of being oppressed individuals. Proposing as a problem to a European peasant the fact that he or she is a person might strike them as strange. This is not true of Latin American peasants, whose world usually ends at the boundaries of the latifundium, whose gestures to some extent simulate those of the animals and the trees, and who often consider themselves equal to the latter. Men who are bound to nature and to the oppressor in this way must come to discern themselves as persons prevented from being. And discovering themselves means in the first instance discovering themselves as Pedro, as Antonio, or as Josefa. This discovery implies a different perception of the meaning of designations. The words world, men, culture, tree, work, animal reassume their true significance. The peasants now see themselves as transformers of reality, previously a mysterious entity, through their creative labor. They discover that, as people, they can no longer continue to be things possessed by others, and they can move from consciousness of themselves as oppressed individuals to the consciousness of an oppressed class. Any attempt to unify the peasants based on activist methods which rely on slogans and do not deal with these fundamental aspects produces a mere juxtaposition of individuals giving a purely mechanistic character to their action. The unity of the oppressed occurs at the human level, not at the level of things. It occurs in a reality which is only authentically comprehended in the dialectic between the sub and the superstructure. In order for the oppressed to unite, they must first cut the umbilical cord of magic and myth which binds them to the world of oppression. The unity which links them to each other must be of a different nature. To achieve this indispensable unity, the revolutionary process must be, from the beginning, cultural action. The methods used to achieve the unity of the oppressed will depend on the latter's historical and existential experience within the social structure. Peasants live in a closed reality with a single, compact center of oppressive decision. The urban oppressed live in an expanding context in which the oppressive command center is plural and complex. Peasants are under the control of a dominant figure who incarnates the oppressive system. In urban areas, the oppressed are subjected to an oppressive impersonality. In both cases, the oppressive power is to a certain extent invisible. In the rural zone, because of its proximity to the oppressed; in the cities, because of its dispersion. Forms of cultural action in such different situations as these have nonetheless the same objective: to clarify to the oppressed the objective situation which binds them to the oppressors, visible or not. Only forms of action which avoid mere speech-making and ineffective blah on the one hand, and mechanistic activism on the other, can also oppose the divisive action of the dominant elites and move towards the unity of the oppressed. Organization. In the theory of anti-dialogical action, manipulation is indispensable to conquest and domination. In the dialogical theory of action, the organization of the people presents the antagonistic opposite of this manipulation. Organization is not only directly linked to unity, but is a natural development of that unity. Accordingly, the leader's pursuit of unity is necessarily also an attempt to organize the people, requiring witness to the fact that the struggle for liberation is a common task. This constant, humble, and courageous witness emerging from cooperation in a shared effort, the liberation of men, women, and men, avoids the danger of anti-dialogical control. The form of witness may vary depending on the historical conditions of any society. Witness itself, however, is an indispensable element of revolutionary action. In order to determine the what and how of that witness, it is therefore essential to have an increasingly critical knowledge of the current historical context, the view of the world held by the people, the principal contradiction of society, and the principal aspect of that contradiction. Since these dimensions of witness are historical, dialogical, and therefore dialectical, witness cannot simply import from them from other contexts without previously analyzing its own. To do otherwise is to absolutize and mythologize the relative. Alienation then becomes unavoidable. Witness, in the dialogical theory of action, is one of the principal expressions of the cultural and educational character of the Revolution. The essential elements of witness which do not vary historically include consistency between words and actions, boldness, which urges the witnesses to confront existence as a permanent risk, radicalization, not sectarianism, leading both the witnesses and the ones receiving that witness to increasing action, courage to love, which, far from being accommodation to an unjust world, is rather the transformation of that world in behalf of the increasing liberation of humankind, and faith in the people, since it is to them that witnesses is made, although witness to the people, because of their dialectical relations with the dominant elites, also affects the latter, who respond to that witness in their customary way. All authentic, that is, critical, witness involves the daring to run risks, including the possibility that the leaders will not always win the immediate adherence of the people. Witness which has not borne fruit at a certain moment and under certain conditions is not thereby rendered incapable of bearing fruit tomorrow. Since witness is not an abstract gesture, but an action, a confrontation with the world and with people, it is not static. It is a dynamic element which becomes part of the societal context in which it occurred. From that moment, it does not cease to affect that context. End of chapter 4. Part 12.